They calculated that her life was worth $180,000. Lily Gray, 13 years old. She burned to death in the back seat of a Ford Pinto on May 28, 1972. The car was hit from behind at 28 miles per hour. The fuel tank exploded. The doors jammed shut. Lily couldn't escape. She burned alive while people on the highway watched and couldn't help. Ford Motor Company knew this would happen. They had crash tested the Pinto 53 times. The fuel tank ruptured in every single test above 25 miles per hour. They knew that rear-end collisions would cause the tank to explode. They knew that doors would jam. They knew that people would burn to death. And they decided it was cheaper to let them die. This is the story of the Ford Pinto. This is the story of the memo that put a price tag on human life. And this is why car companies today can be criminally prosecuted for killing their customers. By the end of this video, you will never look at a product recall the same way again, because what you're about to hear is the reason that corporations can no longer calculate whether your death is worth the cost of fixing their product. Dearborn, Michigan, 1968. Ford Motor Company had a problem. They were losing market share to foreign imports. Volkswagen Beetles and Japanese economy cars were flooding the American market. Cheap, fuel-efficient, small. American car companies were known for big, heavy, gas-guzzling vehicles. Ford needed to compete. They needed a small car. They needed it cheap. And they needed it fast. Lee Iacocca was Ford's president. He was ambitious. He was ruthless. He gave the engineering team a directive. Design a subcompact car that weighs under 2,000 pounds and costs under $2,000, and get it to market in 2 years. Normally, developing a new car took 3.5 to 4 years. Iacocca wanted it done in 25 months. The engineering team said it couldn't be done safely. Iacocca said do it anyway. The Ford Pinto was designed, tested, and rushed into production faster than any car in Ford's history. Corners were cut. Safety features were eliminated. Problems were discovered and ignored. The car went on sale in September 1970. The Pinto had a design flaw, a fatal design flaw. The fuel tank was located behind the rear axle, only 9.5 inches from the rear bumper. In most cars, the fuel tank is positioned above or in front of the rear axle, protected by the body of the car. In the Pinto, it was exposed. When the car was hit from behind, even at low speeds, the rear bumper would collapse. The rear axle would be driven forward. The differential housing, which had sharp bolt heads sticking out, would puncture the fuel tank. Gasoline would spray everywhere. The filler neck would separate from the tank, more gasoline, and the impact would create sparks. Sparks plus gasoline equals fire. Instant fire. The engineering team knew this because they crash tested the Pinto over and over. 43 rear impact crash tests before production. Then 10 more tests after the car was already being sold. 53 tests total. In crashes above 25 miles per hour, the fuel tank ruptured every single time. Every single time. The engineers documented this. They wrote reports. They showed the test footage to management. They explained that the car was a death trap in rear-end collisions. Management asked a question: can we fix it? The answer was yes. There were several ways to fix the problem. The simplest was to install a rubber bladder inside the fuel tank to prevent rupturing. Cost, $8 per car. Another option was to add a plastic baffle between the tank and the differential to prevent puncture. Cost, $11 per car. A third option was to reinforce the bumper and reposition the tank. Cost, $15 to $20 per car. Any of these modifications would have prevented the fuel tank from exploding in low-speed rear-end collisions. Any of them would have saved lives. Ford chose to do none of them. Why? Because Lee Iacocca had set a firm limit. The Pinto had to cost under $2,000. Adding an $11 part would push the retail price over that limit. So Ford made a business decision. They decided to sell the car with the known defect and deal with lawsuits and settlements as they came. They calculated that this would be cheaper than fixing every car. And they were right. From a purely financial standpoint, they were absolutely right. Here's how they calculated it. Ford's internal documents show the math. They wrote it down. They put it in a memo. The memo was titled Fatalities Associated with Crash-Induced Fuel Leakage and Fires. It was prepared by Ford's Environmental and Safety Engineering Division in 1973. The memo was not hidden. It was circulated to management. It was reviewed. It was approved. And it laid out, in cold numerical terms, exactly how much Ford was willing to pay to avoid fixing the Pinto's fuel tank problem. The memo estimated that the Pinto's fuel tank defect would cause 180 deaths and 180 serious burn injuries over the lifetime of the vehicle. They didn't guess at this number. They had data. They had crash test results. They had engineering analysis. They knew that in rear-end collisions above 25 miles per hour, the fuel tank would rupture and the car would likely catch fire. They calculated how many Pintos would be involved in such collisions. They calculated how many of those collisions would result in deaths versus injuries. 180 deaths, 180 serious burn injuries. They wrote this down. Then they assigned a dollar value to each death, not based on what a human life is worth in any moral or ethical sense, based on what Ford estimated they would have to pay in wrongful death settlements. They used a figure that had been established by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for cost-benefit analysis and federal regulations. $200,000 per fatality. That was the standard figure used by the government and by insurance companies at the time. So Ford used it. 180 deaths times $200,000 equals $36 million. They wrote this down. Then they assigned a dollar value to each serious burn injury, again not based on human suffering or medical costs or lifetime disability, based on estimated settlement amounts. They used $67,000 per serious injury. That was the average settlement for burn injuries and product liability cases at the time. 180 injuries times $67,000 equals $12,060,000. They wrote this down. Then they added it up. 36 million for deaths, 12 million for injuries. Total estimated cost of deaths and injuries, $49.5 million. They wrote this down in the memo under the heading, Cost of Producing a Flawed Product. That's what they called it. A flawed product, not a death trap, not a car that would burn people alive. A flawed product. Then they calculated the cost of fixing every Pinto. This was the comparison they were making. Is it cheaper to fix the cars or to pay for the deaths? They estimated that 11 million Pintos and light trucks would be sold over the model's lifetime. The fix they were considering was an $11 rubber bladder that would prevent the fuel tank from rupturing on impact. 11 million vehicles times $11 per vehicle equals $121 million. They wrote this down under the heading, Cost of Producing a Safe Product. Then they compared the two numbers, 49 million versus 121 million. The cost of letting people die was 49 million. The cost of saving them was 121 million. The difference was $72 million. Ford chose the $49 million option. They chose to let 180 people die, and 180 people get horribly burned because it saved the company $72 million. They put this decision in writing. They circulated it to management. Management approved it, and the Pinto went into production with the known defect. This memo would later be discovered during litigation in the Grimshaw case. It became public record. It was published in newspapers. It was shown on television. It became the most infamous internal document in the history of American business, because it proved in writing, with numbers and dollar signs, that Ford Motor Company calculated the value of human life and decided that profit was more important. May 28, 1972, Interstate 15 near San Bernardino, California. Sunday afternoon. Hot day, Memorial Day weekend. Lily Gray, 13 years old, was riding in the back seat of a 1972 Ford Pinto. She was wearing a white dress. She had just been to church. Her neighbor, Richard Grimshaw, age 13, was sitting next to her in the back seat. They were friends from the neighborhood. Richard's mother, May Grimshaw, was driving. They were heading home from a family gathering. The Pinto was yellow, less than a year old. May had bought it new in 1971. She trusted Ford, American company, good reputation, safe car. The Pinto was stopped in traffic on the interstate, not moving, just sitting there waiting for traffic to clear ahead. Then impact. A 1962 Ford Galaxy hit them from behind. The driver had been distracted. He didn't brake in time. He hit the Pinto at approximately 28 miles per hour, not a high-speed crash, not a highway speed collision. Just 28 miles per hour, a minor fender bender by any normal standard. The kind of accident that happens thousands of times every day. The kind that results in bent bumpers and insurance claims, and everyone drives away annoyed but fine. Not this time. The Pinto's fuel tank ruptured on impact. The rear bumper collapsed. The differential housing, with its 6 sharp bolt heads exposed, punched through the sheet metal fuel tank like a fist through paper. 12 gallons of gasoline sprayed into the rear of the car and onto the hot exhaust pipes. The filler neck separated from the tank. More gasoline. The impact created sparks. Sparks hit gasoline vapor. Explosion. The entire rear of the Pinto became an inferno in less than 3 seconds. May Grimshaw tried to open her door. She pulled the handle. Nothing. The door wouldn't move. The impact had bent the door frame just enough to jam the latch. She pulled harder. The door stayed shut. She could feel heat on her back. She could smell gasoline. She could hear flames. Richard tried his door. The right rear passenger door, also jammed. The frame was bent. He pulled. He kicked. Nothing. Lily tried her door. The left rear passenger door where she was sitting, jammed. She yanked the handle. She threw her shoulder against the door. It didn't move. All 3 doors were jammed shut. They were trapped inside a burning car and the fire was spreading fast. The upholstery caught fire. The carpet caught fire. The headliner caught fire. Everything inside the car was burning. May Grimshaw kicked her door. She kicked it again. She kicked it with everything she had. The door finally gave way and popped open. She fell out of the car. She was already on fire. Her clothes were burning. Her hair was burning. She rolled on the ground, screaming, trying to put out the flames. Richard saw his mother get out. He lunged for the driver's door. He squeezed through the gap. He was on fire. His shirt was melting into his skin. He fell onto the pavement next to his mother. Both of them were burning. People were running toward them with blankets and jackets, trying to smother the flames. Lily Gray was still in the back seat. She was on fire. Her white dress was burning. Her hair was burning. She was screaming for help. She was trying to get her door open. It wouldn't move. Witnesses on the highway saw her. They saw a little girl in a white dress trapped in the back seat of a burning car, screaming, pounding on the window. They ran to help. They grabbed the door handle, they pulled. The door was jammed, they couldn't get it open. The fire was too intense, the heat was too great. They had to step back. They had to stand there on the side of Interstate 15 on a Sunday afternoon and watch a 13-year-old girl burn to death because a car door was jammed and they couldn't reach her and the fire was too hot and there was nothing they could do. Nothing. Lily Gray died in the hospital 6 hours later. Her entire body was burned. 3rd-degree burns covering more than 90% of her body. The doctors did everything they could. She died anyway. Richard Grimshaw survived, but 90% of his body was covered in 3rd-degree burns. They had to remove most of his fingers. They had to reconstruct his face. He underwent more than 50 surgeries over the next several years. Skin grafts, reconstructive surgery, pain management, physical therapy. He was 13 years old when it happened. He would spend the rest of his life living with scars covering his entire body. His face was permanently disfigured. His hands were crippled. Every single day for the rest of his life, he would look in the mirror and see what happened when a car company decided that an $11 part was too expensive. Richard's family sued Ford. During the discovery process, their lawyers found the memo, the cost-benefit analysis, the calculation that put a dollar value on human life. The memo that proved Ford knew the Pinto was dangerous and sold it anyway because fixing it was too expensive. The case went to trial in 1978. The jury heard about the crash tests. They heard about the $11 part. They heard about the memo. They heard Ford executives testify that the Pinto met all federal safety standards at the time, which was true but irrelevant. The standards were low. Ford knew the car was unsafe beyond the minimum legal requirements and chose profit over safety. The jury awarded Richard Grimshaw $2.5 million in compensatory damages. Then they did something unprecedented. They awarded him $125 million in punitive damages. Punitive damages are meant to punish the defendant and deter future misconduct. $125 million was the largest punitive damage award in American history at that time. The judge later reduced it to $3.5 million, but the message was sent. A corporation that knowingly sells a deadly product can be punished beyond just compensating victims. Lily Gray was not the only one who died. Between 1971 and 1978, at least 27 people burned to death in Ford Pintos after low-speed rear-end collisions. 27 confirmed deaths, likely more that were never connected to the fuel tank defect. Hundreds more were injured, burned, disfigured, permanently disabled, all because Ford decided that an $11 part was too expensive. One victim was Sandra Gillespie, 19 years old, killed in 1973 when her Pinto was rear-ended and exploded in flames. Another was Donna Ulrich, 18, killed along with her cousin in 1978 when their Pinto was hit from behind at 35 miles per hour. The car exploded. They burned to death. The driver who hit them wasn't even injured. It was a minor accident that should have resulted in minor damage. Instead, it resulted in 2 teenagers burning alive. Ford finally recalled the Pinto in 1978. Not voluntarily, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration ordered the recall after years of complaints. Ford recalled 1.4 million Pintos built between 1971 and 1976. They installed a longer filler pipe and a plastic shield. The modifications cost about $20 per car, $28 million total, far less than the $121 million they calculated it would cost to fix before selling the car. They could have done it from the beginning for $11. Instead, they waited until people died, until forced by the government, then spent $20 to fix it. 27 people were already dead. But the Pinto case did something unprecedented. In 1978, a grand jury in Elkhart, Indiana, indicted Ford Motor Company on charges of reckless homicide. 3 teenage girls had died when their Pinto exploded after being rear-ended. The local prosecutor argued that Ford's conduct was criminal. Ford had knowingly sold a car that would kill people. The case went to trial in 1980, first time in American history that a corporation faced criminal charges for a defective product. The prosecution showed crash test footage. They showed the cost-benefit memo. The defense argued the Pinto met federal safety standards. The jury deliberated 4 days. Verdict, not guilty. Ford was acquitted, but the precedent was set. A corporation could be criminally prosecuted for killing its customers. After the Pinto, product liability law was never the same. Courts began allowing punitive damages in cases where companies knowingly sold dangerous products. The idea that a company could calculate that deaths were acceptable became legally indefensible. The Pinto memo became Exhibit A in product liability cases for 40 years, and it led to changes in how cars are designed and regulated. The federal government created stricter fuel system integrity standards. Rear-end crash tests became mandatory. Fuel tanks had to withstand higher speed impacts. Door latches had to remain functional after impacts. These weren't suggestions, they were laws. Lee Iacocca, the Ford president who pushed the Pinto into production, never admitted wrongdoing. He left Ford in 1978, became CEO of Chrysler, became a business icon. He wrote a best-selling autobiography. He died in 2019, wealthy and celebrated. In his memoir, he called the fuel tank controversy media hype. The crash test data said otherwise. The 27 dead bodies said otherwise. The memo said otherwise. Ford stopped making the Pinto in 1980, 10 years of production, 3 million cars sold. The Pinto became synonymous with corporate negligence. The memo became famous, entered as evidence in hundreds of lawsuits, taught in MBA programs as what not to do. It became the reason that no company today will put in writing that they calculated the cost of your death. But there was someone who made sure the Pinto victims were never forgotten. His name was Ralph Nader. He was a consumer safety advocate who had already exposed General Motors for producing the Chevrolet Corvair, another unsafe car. When the Pinto scandal broke, Nader made it a national issue. He testified before Congress. He wrote articles, he gave speeches, he organized protests. He made sure that every American knew about the memo. He made sure that Congress knew. And because of his advocacy, Congress passed laws that changed product liability forever. The Motor Vehicle Safety Act was expanded. The Consumer Product Safety Commission was given more power. Punitive damages became standard in product liability cases. Criminal prosecution of corporations became possible. All of this flowed directly from Ralph Nader's campaign to make sure the Pinto deaths meant something. Today, when a car company discovers a safety defect, they issue a recall immediately. Not because they're moral, because the legal and financial consequences of not recalling are catastrophic. A company that knowingly sells a dangerous product faces criminal prosecution, billion-dollar punitive damage awards, and complete destruction of their brand reputation. The cost-benefit analysis that Ford did in 1968 is no longer possible, not because companies became more ethical, Because the law changed, because 27 people burned to death, because a 13-year-old girl named Lily Gray was trapped in the back seat of a car that Ford knew would explode and sold anyway. Because Richard Grimshaw survived with 90% of his body burned and spent the rest of his life showing the world what corporate cost-benefit analysis looks like on human skin. Every car you've ever driven has been crash tested for rear-end fuel system integrity. Every recall you've ever heard about happened because companies are legally required to fix defects, not calculate whether deaths are cheaper. Every punitive damage award you've ever read about exists because the Pinto jury said that killing your customers for profit is unacceptable. Every criminal prosecution of a corporation for a dangerous product traces back to that courthouse in Indiana in 1980 when a prosecutor said that negligent homicide applies to companies, not just individuals. The next time you see a recall notice, remember Lily Gray, 13 years old, burned alive in the back seat of a Ford Pinto because the company that built that car decided her life was worth less than $11. The next time you hear about a company facing criminal charges for a defective product, remember that it took 27 deaths and a cost-benefit analysis memo to make that possible. The next time you sit in your car and feel safe, remember that every safety feature, every crash test standard, every regulation exists because someone died without it, and someone else decided their death should mean something. Ford paid millions in settlements. They recalled the cars. They stopped production. They moved on. Lee Iacocca became famous. The executives retired wealthy. Everyone involved moved on with their lives, except the 27 people who burned to death, except Richard Grimshaw, who spent 50 years living with burns covering his body, except the families who identified loved ones by dental records because bodies were burned beyond recognition. They didn't get to move on. Most of the time, we don't know the names of people who died to create the laws that protect us. But not the Pinto, not Lily Gray, not Richard Grimshaw. Their case became famous. The memo became infamous. And the law that came from their deaths saves lives every day. Someone bleeds. The law gets written. And we owe it to them to remember why that law exists. Because the moment we forget is the moment some corporation starts calculating whether your death is cheaper than fixing their product. The Pinto memo proved that without consequences, they'll choose profit every time.